You think about it, from 65 to 90, that's 25 years of your life that you expect to just not earn money. What a wild concept. You really only get the value of your house when you sell and downsize, and doing that is something that everyone talks about in theory and rarely does.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
And today we've got certified financial planner and founder of the New School of Finance, Shannon Lee Simmons here. And she's going to be joining us to discuss saving for retirement.
But before our conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
Canada's National Institute for Aging recently did a survey of 6,000 older Canadians to find out how they feel about the prospect of retirement, and the results were definitive. Most survey respondents, all of whom are 50 or older, do not feel that they are financially secure enough to be able to retire when they want to. And 44% of them had not put away any money for retirement in the last year. Another 44% of the 55 to 65 age cohort had less than $5,000 in their savings. Shannon, as a financial planner, do any of those numbers surprise you?
Nope, not at all. So because I'm a fee-only financial planner, I don't have investment minimums for people to work with me. So I get people from all walks of life, people who don't have $5,000 saved for retirement, and people who just inherited like $3 million. So, and everything in between. And that number doesn't surprise me at all. It's especially in the last few years. The sort of prioritization of where money goes is going to pay off debt and mortgages. It's like a race. And there's so many demands on our money these days that it's hard to make room for savings.
So Shannon, I know you specialize in millennial clients, or at least have a lot of them. And when we look at millennials, we're talking about people from their late 20s to their early 40s. So is that cohort saving enough for retirement right now?
Yeah, so I have a lot of clients from all ages, and I think sometimes I utilize that anecdotal evidence from the future to my millennial clients. I'm an elder millennial myself. I'll be 40 this year. Do I think that cohort is saving enough? I have always said this about millennials. I feel like we need to speak about them in two different ways. There's the elder millennial cohort, and then there's the younger millennial cohort who are like in their 20s still. And I wouldn't be able to say the same thing about the whole swath of them. So those who are coming to me for retirement advice are the ones who are like 35 plus, right? So they're reaching into that middle age sort of view and thinking, I've been working for 15 years. I got another 20 years to go. Is that even a thing? Should I be worrying about retirement? Can I even? So those questions are coming up a lot. And to answer the question directly, like, are they saving enough? I would say no, but not because there's a lack of effort or anxiety. I would say that the average person I'm working with is there are so many other competing goals during those years, especially like paying down debt, paying down a mortgage still, putting kids through summer camp. All of these things sort of add up and add up and add up. And there's not a lot of money left over at the end of the day so that you can say, oh, and my RRSP, oh, also my TFSA. So they are saving, or they're trying to, but for retirement, I think is maybe the piece that's really tricky. So no, it's going to be tricky down the road for sure.
And is this just a housing story?
That's interesting. No, I think that there's the cost of living, just in general, cost of food, inflation, all of those things. I also think that it's an employment issue. So I started working with people in a fee-only way. So that means like I don't need a certain amount of assets under management, right? So you don't have just a little sliver of the population to work with. In 2010, and the starting wage for an average professional then was like $45,000, $40,000. And now we're in 2024, and the average wage for a professional job can be sometimes like not necessarily a lawyer, but like a starting wage can be somewhere in the same range. And the cost of living has shot up across the board beyond just housing. And so, no, I think it's a combination of things, although housing, expensive rent, and expensive housing where it demands you to have a massive mortgage are things that are delaying the ability to save properly for retirement.
So Cara mentioned that data earlier that kind of showed that there's widespread feelings of financial insecurity, particularly when it comes to retirement savings. Mm-hmm. Is that overblown for some people? Do you actually find some people who are actually better off than they think, to paraphrase that old commercial?
Yeah, I think they're still using that slogan. But like, I think that there are people who are actually okay, but the anxiety is so intense that they don't think that they are. So part of what I think is sometimes really helpful with taking a hard look at one's finances is really actually understanding, like, am I as in trouble as I think I am or not? And usually, and especially with millennial clients, time is still on your side. And so a little bit can go a long way, but it feels hopeless when you feel like you can only do a little bit at a time. You can't imagine sort of reaching that end marker that we all think we're supposed to get to one day. But it doesn't always have to be as scary. And so having that plan sort of mapped out can really sort of alleviate that anxiety. I also think that understanding what one needs is important, because we hear these, one-liners in the media, like you need like over $1 million to retire on, and you have to own a house and like all that stuff. And you have an average person being like, well, I can't do either of those things. So I guess I'm in trouble. I guess I'm not going to be okay. But, how much do you need in retirement is like asking how long a piece of string is. It's 100% subjective. And so working that out with people sometimes and reminding them of like government pensions that are hopefully still there for everybody at the end of the day, and time being on your side, you can actually cobble together a picture that is not as dire as it may seem. And that is super motivating, I think, when people see that it's actually not as scary and they don't need this like to be a millionaire in a giant house to be secure. It can be really motivating to actually take action again.
This brings us nicely to what I want to ask you next, which is something that I've been arguing a lot with Mike. One thing that I love about you is that I feel like listening to your advice over the years and reading your books has kind of helped me feel less anxious about money. And that's been really freeing. And I hear from people all the time that they're feeling financially insecure and that they'll never be able to retire, even if they own a house with tons of equity. Mm-hmm. When I was renting, I felt a lot of anxiety because every year a rent would go up and I didn't know how long the building was going to exist, even though it was purpose-built rental. I was like, it's going to be knocked down for a condo one day. Like, it's going to happen. And I felt like saving for retirement was daunting. And it was like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to retire. I bought a house a year ago. So I have very little equity in my home, but I don't worry about retirement the same way because I know that my costs are predictable for the next while. At least for 5 years, it's predictable. And I don't expect theoretically, it should be roughly the same. While if I was renting, it'd be going up every single year. And I know that if I can't save enough to retire, if I don't have enough in a pension to retire, then at least like I have a house that I could potentially sell. I could downsize. I could rent, which put me back in the same situation I was before, where I wasn't thrilled about that, but with a giant amount of money to be able to pay for it. Because even if the house doesn't go up a lot over the next few years, like over the next 30 years, which I expect Toronto, it probably will. But even if it doesn't, I still would end up with sitting okay at the end of the day. Am I too calm here?
There's so much there. So number one, I would say the cost of living also goes up in a house. So you said that the costs are like rising every year. Well, in Ontario, there's a maximum unless you get one of the newer places, which I understand that. But if it's rent controlled, there's that. But like hydro could go up every year. Your property taxes are out of your control. Insurance rates could go up. I understand that it feels a little bit more predictable, but what's not predictable about homeownership too is like, oh, there's a $5,000 repair coming out of nowhere. Oh, there's a furnace. There's that. So that sense of, well, I know what my costs are and they won't change on me is interesting that you said that as a homeowner, because I typically hear that with renting, because it's like, it's the rent and it goes up at the rate that it goes up unless I get rent evicted or something like this. And the housing is the unpredictable money pit that people are terrified of. So I'm really fascinated and excited for you that you are calm about that. Of course, everyone's situation is different. Some people have houses that are 150 years old and some people have houses that are 20 years old. And
I think I bought a 100-year-old house, so I'm aware of the money that is going to go into it. Right. And I know, and I kind of have that in my mind and I'm like, okay, I need to do that. But I don't expect to have it like with renting where I'm like, oh, it's going to double or triple in 30 years. Do you think rent is going to triple? Like it could. And if you move out every time when I moved out, when I had a kid, it was like my rent went up 70%.
Yeah. So I think what you're nailing on there is the housing insecurity piece, right? If I have to move, then I'm subject to market rent and I have no control over that. And that is terrifying. And I agree with that. And so when you have a house, even if it's one that's like very expensive or whatever, and your mortgage, not you, I've seen this a lot since interest rates have gone up. Your mortgage has tripled and now you're paying like, $5,000 a month in a mortgage payment. People are really stressed out about that. There's still this idea and a theory, absolutely, that, that'll go down at some point. And then one day you'll be mortgage free. That is the big win of homeownership. One day when the mortgage is gone, you can live on a month-to-month basis, sort of like relatively cheaply, all things considered, probably for less than what like market rent would be, depending on your situation. And I think that's the ultimate goal. So kind of like during these homeowner years where you have a big mortgage and it's like things are breaking and there's all this stuff, like it really is, there's lines of credit that I see rolling all the time. But if you can reach that sort of like epitome goal of being mortgage free, I do see the benefit. Do I think you're too calm as in I don't have to save anymore?
No, I don't have to save anymore. Just thinking that before I was like, I need to save or I might like not be able to retire. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And sometimes you don't have a choice if you're going to retire or not. And so I think having it made me think, well, like I might not be the retirement I dream of, but I could always sell and rent somewhere or downsize and move somewhere else if I wanted to. Like there is a way that I will be able to get away with not working if I can't or don't want to at some point.
I do believe that homeownership creates options because you could do this or you could do that, right? So right away, there's like 2 or 3 options at your disposal. But I'm careful to say that like it's not the be all end all of retirement security. What I see typically with my clients who are not millennials, who are like my baby boomers and my Gen Xers who are retiring or retired, is that you really only get the value of your house when you sell and downsize. And doing that is something that everyone talks about in theory and rarely does. It's usually a move that's made once people are super, super old, elderly and they cannot maintain anymore. Or it's a desperate situation, which is like, we don't have retirement savings and we must do this. If you're somewhere in the middle, you kind of try to stay in it for as long as you can, because if you think about your community ties, all of those things that are there for you. But you are correct. If you have paid off your mortgage, being key, and you sell your house in many, many years from now, you will get tax-free a big chunk of money at one solid time that you can either downsize with, or, use it to supplement rent, or you can make those sort of decisions for yourself down the road. I would say though, if you're renting right now, the whole point of the mortgage, if you look at the mortgage payments that you're making, a part of it is savings and a part of it is just throwing away to interest, just chucking it away. And so if you were to sort of analyze someone's life and look at back and forth, just be like, okay, well, what is the value of this person's like savings every month? It's like the equity that they're paying into the mortgage, and try to force yourself into that if you are renting to try to sort of keep it up and like invest. I think that there's still an argument to be made that you can have a very, very, you could maybe not match depending on housing, but you could have a very safe and secure retirement, even if you've rented the whole time. What's making it difficult is that rent has skyrocketed so much that now trying to save a ton of money while renting is becoming a harder and harder thing to do. And that's so unfair, because I feel like, the people who need to be saving the most are the people who aren't just like automatically forced to every month on a mortgage payment.
Yeah, it seems like the cost of renting is like almost the same cost as a mortgage is on a home, especially if you look at family size homes. Like there's not a big difference. I guess it's part of why I'm like, at least some of that's going to savings, right? I want to hear from Mike.
Yeah, well, so, I think there's a couple of things here. So, and, for our listeners, like Cara and I have been kind of arguing like cats and dogs in our internal Slack channel over the last 24 to 48 hours on this. So this is a couple of things. So, if I look at it, if you're age 65, it's better to have a large asset than to not have a large asset, right?
Of course, right? Math.
Yeah, it's just mathematically true. Where I would push back a little, though, I think this idea that you can have almost all of your portfolio tied up in a single illiquid asset that is, quite, has a lot of idiosyncratic risk to it, I don't think is a great way to retire. And I think there's this kind of implicit assumption here that when you retire, your expenses necessarily go down and you'll quote unquote be fine. That works until you have, a relative with a disability. Could be a partner, could be a child, could be a parent. There are a lot of ways, and I'm sorry to scare people here. There are a lot of ways that your expenses could go up substantially. And again, I say that as a parent with a child with a severe disability. So I think Cara's being a little bit overly optimistic. Okay, well, I have this single really expensive asset, so I could always sell it and be fine.
Like, the reasons I'm angry all the time about housing is always the case for why I should be a little bit calm, because I'm like, nothing's happening to make these more affordable. This is going to keep going up. This is a problem for society. And every time when I was debating about whether to buy a home, I was like, I should, because the reason every time I get up every day and I'm angry about the housing market, that's the case to buy a home.
Right, but where are you going to live? You're like, oh, I can sell my house. Well,
same as where the renters are going to live.
Well, it's fun. And this is what I find as the Gen Xer here, I find there's this really amazing debate between the boomers and the millennials, right? Because the boomers are always telling the millennials that, well, if you can't find a home, just move somewhere cheaper. Go live in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. Not everybody has to live in Toronto, and now, the sort of the counter argument here is like, well, I have, it's fine if all of my assets are tied up in the single thing, because I can just retire and move to Weyburn, Saskatchewan, right? So it's just this weird dynamic where it's like, well, if you can't afford to live here, just move and everything's fine and there's no.
The boomers say that like there's no problem. Like, I've heard from many boomers, not all boomers. I know there's lots of great boomers out there, but I've heard from many boomers before that like, well, we had to move. I know lots of people who had to move. You just have to move too, and you're fine. There's not a problem. Stop complaining. And I'm like, no, there is a problem, and I still think that could exist, but like it's still you're way bit more you're benefited if you have the home. When I hear from people I know who are Gen X or boomers who are closer to retirement, who bought in early enough that they've seen massive gains on their homes and they're still worried about retirement, I'm like, I don't understand.
It's because they don't want to move. So you don't actually realize the value of that asset, and it is illiquid. And so unless you move to a small town or move way out and to capture that asset, it doesn't pay for your groceries. And that is the problem. So a lot of the boomers that I work with that are retiring, they are not downsizing because they're like, well, all of my family and friends and community and my entire life is here. And so I'm going to sell my place for 1.5 and then move somewhere for 900. And after all the things, I might get 300,000, which is great, but that's not going to support you for like the next 25 years. It's just not it could, but it's like at the rate that they want to spend money. So what I'm actually seeing is people just working longer. And I think that's really going to be the sort of norm, this idea. You think about it, from 65 to 90, that's 25 years of your life that you expect to just not earn money. What a wild concept. If you actually think about that, that is bonkers idea. What the heck did we think? Why did we think that was normal? And it has not been normal for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years because people died young. And so fine, stop working at 65 because you got 5 years there, put your feet up. But now the expectation that of 25 years that you could pay bills, what a race. That's a rich person's game. That is a wild thing to ask, because we're living for so much longer, in my opinion. And so what I'm seeing across all generations is a willingness to, or an acceptance of, the fact that there might be a prolonged period of a semi-retirement. For example, I stopped grinding it out doing this thing that I'm so sick of and tired of and bored of and whatever, because I've been doing it for 45 friggin' years or whatever. I do something I really like, but I make $10,000 to $15,000 a year, and I cruise on that until 70 years old or 75 or whatever. And then I start eating into my assets because I'm so tired. But during 65 to 75, I want to travel. I want to go to Europe, and I want to do things. And this amount of money cannot do that stuff for me. So I have to work if I want to do the things that I want to do. And I feel like that might be sort of the shift, the societal shift that might happen.
The part that you said there is that like that money's not going to go that far and the house is not liquid. I know a lot of people want to be able to hold on to their house until the end and then give money to their kids. If people want to, though, can't they borrow from their home to fund their lives in those last 30 years?
I don't love reverse mortgages. That is what I'll say. I think that there is a time and place where it is a tool. And I think that there's a time and place when it's not a good tool. And anybody who would be debating that as a tool should get some unbiased, customized advice. That's what I would say.
Fair. I would love to do more. I'd like to hear more about reverse mortgages because I've always thought like, well, that's a way that they can kind of have their cake and eat it too. You can stay in your home and it's not ideal. And I've always heard it's not an ideal thing to be in debt at that point in your life, but it's an option.
I think if you're very old, I think where that can come into a spicy situation is if you're looking at that option at like 65, 70, that's years and years of an ever increasing debt. And then to your point earlier, where you're like, well, I could always just sell and then take the equity at that point. If you've been building and building and building and not making any lifestyle changes and living off of it, and then you go to sell, well, now you don't have any equity left in your house. The nest egg is gone. So what I think the better thing to do if you're in a position where you're debating a reverse mortgage, like if you're very, very old and you're not going to live for very long, okay, let's have a discussion about it. This is a different scenario. And then being someone who like arrives at the finish line and is like, okay, I'm really tired of working. I'll just borrow off my house for the next 20 years. It's a very, very spicy game to do that. The better thing to do would be to assess like how you could, even if it was a downside, how you could downsize, how you could make it work. Could you move somewhere? Like there's a lot of other things so that you don't end up being 85 with nothing.
Well, Shannon, just thank you so much for being here. And I also want to say, we love you boomers. We're not mad. And we love our folks out in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. So big shout out to my friends, Daryl and Donna out there. Moving out there is not necessarily the bad option, but it's not for everyone. And
I just want to say thank you to Shannon for joining us because I always, like I said, you've really changed my perspective on money. I always think back to in your Worry-Free Money book where you talked about seeing people's behind the scenes amount of money that they have. And you should just, at this point in your life, just assume everyone has Beyonce money. If you're like, how can they afford that? And I've had that in my head for years. And it's like, I used to sit there, especially before I owned a home, being like, why are all my friends buying? Why do they have nicer homes than me? And then I started talking to them about money after reading your book and you talked about talking to your friends about money and about when you're going out, expectations, that kind of thing. And I realized I have friends who've gotten $500,000 in gifts from their parents. So of course they have nicer homes than me. So now whenever I see it, I just go, they have Beyonce money.
Yeah, it can't be, you can't compare. Can't compare.
Thank you everyone for watching and listening. And thanks as always to our incredible producer, Meredith Martin.
And if you have any burning economic or housing questions, please feel free to reach out to us at missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.